All right. It's 1:30 a.m. and your boy has to meet a quota of one video per week, which, well, I'm late because it's supposed to be by Friday midnight, but here we are. We're just gonna do it. It's gonna be a short one. I gotta get something out. I'm ready to go to sleep, but there was something that I read on Hacker News earlier this afternoon. It's about the announcement with the OpenAI GPT-5.2 model, and the Codex CLI now has, I think, support for skills. So, and if you're not aware, skills is another thing that is recent and that came out of Anthropic. They are the same people who gave us the MCP. Now they're giving us the skills. Anyway, that got me thinking. Well, it just brought back something that has been on my mind for a while now. And I just have this feeling that we are going to, well, ideally, I think that this whole agentic thing should just learn from the past and just really get boring. I think there's a lot that is happening right now that could be just stuff that we already know how to do, and just instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, basically. So we're gonna talk about that briefly, and hopefully you can see what I'm preaching. You buy what I'm preaching, I should say. Anyway, so my take here is that we should be reaching for a boring agentic future, right? Right now we have all these agentic coding tools. They're everywhere all the time. We have Codex, Claude, Gemini CLI, OpenCode, so on and so forth. Excuse me. I think they're all reinventing the same things for the most part. And I guess that's kind of the point. It's just really competitors trying to just compete. One comes out with a feature, the other one wants to do the same thing, and so on. Whatever. So the question is, what if we used boring infrastructure instead of just having all these different tools doing different things and all that? So right now we have this situation where every tool has its own sandboxing, its own permission model, its own resource management, its own way to connect to models. And the premise that I'm setting here, or I guess that I want to bring up, is that I feel like we solved this decades ago, and it's called, I would like you to think about things this way. The agentic loop in all these tools, right? It basically just schedules work. Models, tools, resources, I mean, you just read from them and you write to them. MCP, A2A, whatever protocol comes next, it's all just going to be I/O. The Linux device model handles this elegantly, and it has done so for 50 years now. So what I have in mind, and I mean, all of this it's not fully baked, but it's a bunch of ideas that I think can be composed together. So think about a type 2 hypervisor, right? And let's say that hypervisor it implements the OCI runtime spec, and it also, provides support for the Linux device model, right? Typically for these hypervisors, you already have support for real host devices. And really we're thinking in terms of network, storage, GPUs, whatever. And what we'll just need to do is to just retrofit things so that we can add some sort of device driver for the AI stuff. Because really for models, tools, resources, we can handle all that via device driver abstractions. And we can do away with the whole MCP server, the whole thing of that just came out recently with skills and all that stuff. And we just think in terms of devices and device drivers. So from that perspective, right, models like Claude, well, the application, I guess, well, actually specifically the models, Claude, GPT, Gemini, those models that will basically show up as devices that you read from and write to from your application. The tools, right now, I think, if you're using OpenCode, whether it's OpenCode or Codex or Claude, they use tools like Bash, Browser, Git, right? You can just handle those as character devices. In some other cases for resources, and maybe you have your workspace directory or some database file or whatever that you want to be part of this agentic application that you're building, you can expose that via a block or network device model or as block or network devices. The interesting here is that now you have the same interface, right, that your app already uses for everything else. Like we're already used to that. And if you want to swap models, it's just a matter of, you mount a different device. In terms of, I guess, concrete components that we can use today to build this kind of runtime that I'm talking about, specifically a user space hypervisor with that provides agentic, I guess we can call it an agentic hypervisor runtime, right? In terms of components that we can use that we already have today, we can basically leverage something like gvisor, right? It's a very well-known hypervisor. It's a user space type 2 hypervisor. You can retrofit it, right? It has a pretty good sandboxing model. It's used by, it's battle tested, basically. It's already OCI compliant. In terms of the actual agentic, let's call it the agentic loop, right? You can handle that. Maybe that's a little bit more advanced, but just in terms of ideas, you can use something like, you can use the eBPF enabled user space scheduling. You can use that functionality for the agentic policies of how, things are scheduled for this agentic application or the agentic runtime. You can definitely leverage your Uring. Excuse me. And that's, well, in case if you're not familiar with IO Uring, it's basically a way to do IO in a way that's, well, pretty fast these days. And you're basically avoiding syscalls. In fact, there was a recent research paper that came out. Gosh, well, I don't have the name of it right in my face, and I don't want to switch away from this presentation to go look for it. But anyway. IO Uring is pretty cool, right? And you can use it for storage, network. Yeah. So that would be a really good thing to include as part of this runtime. For state, you can just use SQLite or RocksDB. In fact, I think the folks at Terso are already thinking about agentic, agents as just being a loop that basically does stuff on a SQLite database, right? So I think we are aligned on that front, right? So anyway, so for state, you will use something like SQLite or RocksDB, basically an in-process database. And what's ideal here is that all the pieces that I've just listed, they are battle tested, right? And we're just really composing them together. So another aspect is that of this composition or this hypervisor, this agentic hypervisor runtime will be that you will have security that becomes a kernel guarantee, not just some permission prompt, some random config file, especially when those config files are specific for a specific tool. Right? I think if you're using Claude, you have a specific config file for that. If you're using Codex, you have a specific configuration set up for that. And yeah, so in what I'm talking about here, it's it will be something that is actually handled at a much lower level and can give you better peace of mind. Essentially, the isolation will be real. It will be whatever isolation people are using in production right now that people are already used to, right? People use gvisor as basically a VM manager for well, that's exactly what they use it for their production workloads, because it provides good isolation. So, this is things that we already know, right? That we're already used to. And, from that perspective, the agent can't touch what it cannot mount, for example, right? If you're relying on these, on the kernel guarantees, you get composition, right? Or I guess the ability to compose things, different tools in the whole cloud ecosystem. You basically get it for free because the hypervisor, as we mentioned earlier, is OCI compliant, right? So just like gvisor, you can use it. I guess, well, actually, I don't think that, I was thinking about the one from Amazon. Gosh, I forgot the name. Jesus. Well, it doesn't matter. Anyway, I guess the point here is that you basically are reusing tools or components that we've actually been using for a very long time now to run workloads in productions, and you're just kind of finding a way to compose them into a very, very solid and basically a platform or a framework upon which you can really have a common, well tested, well understood stack for this whole agentic tool or agentic coding tool thingy. All right, we're almost at the end. What did I want to say here? So yeah, so I guess again, if we are going with the device model perspective, then swapping models is basically just changing a mount point, right? Adding tools is just loading a driver, right? Or I guess loading a device. You can also choose whichever device driver you want to be able to use with these quote-unquote AI and I guess virtual devices. You get security by being able to control what devices, the application is allowed to access. Again, the application in this case represents a VM that runs on top of this hypervisor, right? And so, yeah, from that point of view, you can say that what is old is new, right? And I really think somebody should build this. It will save us a whole lot of headaches, and just in terms of the proliferation of these tools and just having standards that people can, just having a framework that we can all build around and feel good about it in terms of, hey, this is just using technologies that we are very familiar with. And I'm not just talking about some weekend project thing where you're using this bleeding edge libraries from, I don't know, NPM or from Node.js that's probably going to be abandoned in less than a year. Basically, you're relying on components that are very well battle tested, and we just rely on them already for production workloads day in, day out. And yeah, I think that's basically it. Right. I guess the point here is that in tech, it seems to be the case that we just find a way to reinvent the wheel, or just to rediscover ideas, and I guess we rebrand them or we repackage them as being new. Anyway, I've always been, I don't know if suspicious the right word, but just the whole MCP protocol thing, I never really bought it fully into it. Like, I get why it exists. I just don't know that that's the best way to handle this long term. Same thing with, I guess Google has its own called A2A. And I think recently Anthropic came out with some article basically saying things that seem to indicate that the way in which people are using MCP server is actually not that effective. And I mean, there's been a lot of talk about how MCP actually, especially with the issue of having a bunch of tools that take up space in your context, right? Or just the bloat of having so many MCP servers. And obviously there's the security implications of that. Yeah, I just don't think whatever we've done so far with MCP servers, I think Google has its own A2A, agent to agent, I guess, protocol is called. Now Anthropic is telling us about scales. So I think we've, collectively decided that agents.md is now a good variant of readme.md that we should all be creating for agents now. Things like that. And I get why they're happening. The takeaway from this is that we could potentially have a framework to build agentic applications that relies on battle-tested components that we're all already familiar with in terms of, just building regular applications. It's just a matter of finding the right composition model. And I happen to believe that, when it comes to the whole AI, think of AI as just another, just as another device, right? Just like you have a network device or a storage device, right? And you can think of a model as, as a device, the tools as a device, the resources as a device. And I think the MCP server, those are the main entities that are part of the protocol, right? And so you can really learn from the Linux device model, steal idea from that and apply it here and really build an interesting agentic runtime that can serve as a foundation the same way that, we have things like the OCI runtime or the OCI standard for, container images. And I hope that I was able to at least give you some ideas about what's possible. It's possible. None of this is fully baked. This is just things that I've been kind of, just thinking about off and on. I hope that this was inspiring in, any way. It's important to think about these technologies and these tools. Basically think about how would you build it? How would you do things differently? Right? And basically through that process, learn about the technologies that you use or that, that people are using in the field, and basically have your own ideas about how things should work. Anyway, it's about to be 2 a.m. I still need to package this video and upload it. If this was an interesting listen, please do like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.